Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value-creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a Soka researcher and educator. I hope you find the discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy the conversation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Byron. I come from a small rural community here in America. I was raised where life was simple, but the lessons were deep. Growing up, we learned early on that you don't measure a person by their words, but by their consistency, humility, and strength when no one's watching. My roots trace back to Finland, a culture that values resilience, honesty, and a quiet kind of courage. And though I grew up thousands of miles away from my ancestors' homeland, those values are still alive in the way I was raised. Work hard, speak truthfully, respect others, and honor commitments even when it costs you. These are the lessons that shape the way I see everything, from technology to relationships to leadership.
Welcome to the podcast, Byron. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to have you here, and I really appreciate you starting off the conversation with these core values of yours. And definitely, it's something that I'm very curious to learn more about. This Finnish family of yours, and also the ways in which those lessons were imparted to you, because I'm sure that it was not just on like a I don't know, a brief like afternoon and then suddenly click, you got it, and no more work needed. But probably days upon weeks upon years compounding, and then also just kind of observing from those around you, right, who were kind of carrying out and living those values. So, from this kind of like wholesome American upbringing. It's so great. And at the same time, the way that we met was not even in the US, it was actually in
Yeah.
China, of all places.
hmm
So there is this global dimension to the conversation that I also look forward to hearing about, right? From Finland to the US to China and probably a bunch of other places. It's really amazing that we were able to have an experience where we got to explore a new place together, a new culture. We laughed, we cried, we jumped for joy. We did a lot of things exploring what was happening in China with regards to innovation and education. So it's just awesome that we can have this space, and I just want to get to know you even better. So like now I'd like to pass it back to you and ask if you could maybe share a little bit more about who were some of the major influences in your life from this Finnish family, and just kind of like share out kind of what maybe you can like, even like hone in on one of those values, and if there's a story behind it, that would be very interesting to kind of just kick us off.
hmm Yeah, I think probably the core value is actually work ethic, just being willing to get the job done. Um, my grandfather uh, basically started what eventually would become the largest non-union contractor in New Hampshire during the 70s and 80s. Um, he basically did a whole design build in-house. They had architects and engineers and laborers and logistics support, everything. Um, he managed to accomplish this by basically pulling from a pool of people who were affiliated with Western Finland, people who came from there, who were fresh off the boat, people who had been, you know, who had already been through several generations here in the United States as well. There were people who came from northern Michigan, from other regions of America that where from Nordic roots, or the culture community was kind of based off of that. The main thing that my grandfather was always about, he passed away in 2016, I think it was, but the main thing he was always about was how fast can you get a job done, you know, and that was his motivation. Just work hard, get things done, and there's obviously a lot of in business, there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of things, but at the end of the day, everybody was just encouraged to kind of push ahead no matter what. So I can credit him as the major influencer of my life overall. But beyond that, I mean, obviously my parents, and then really my second parents, my aunt and uncle. I was there every day, pretty much as a young person, and getting to know the first friendship I had in my life, who is a great guy. I still talk to him all the time. Um, yeah, we were always over there. I had a sense of little bit of apprehension, but also a tremendous amount of love. And yeah, it was a great experience growing up in this group.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. I mean, just to well, I'm just thinking of like the concept of work itself, right? How important that was and how it was modeled very well by your grandfather, your parents, your aunt and uncle, and then to be able to kind of like learn, like it's almost like ready-made experiences where they're like, this is what you're gonna do, or we need help with this. Can you fill in here? And
Mhm.
being able to take action right away and like acquire skills, right? These are the trade skills that I think more and more we kind of find missing in the United States. And yeah, and maybe could you speak a little bit about that, for a lot of us who didn't grow up with like a hammer and a nail, or other tools, like what is it about the work that you do with your hands that is satisfying in a way that maybe other types of work aren't?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the accessibility of it, right? When somebody, I remember learning a little bit about programming through the years, and I always um, I always kind of felt like it was difficult to understand until like I started to see things more from the same way a person would look at a car. Like you have your alternator, you have your engine, you have all these discrete components, well, these discrete objects. And that's the same thing with object oriented programming. And what I'm venturing into now is just more cybersecurity. But uh, the accessibility of building something physically is that anyone can see it, except for, well, the components that are buried, but we all get a general understanding of why they're there. There's a reason why a foundation is built. It's the structure that supports the rest of the house. There's a reason why site work has to go in. There's always questions about that. Like how long has the soil been around, or how stable is it? Different people have figured out through the years. Like there's some recent projects in the news that are rather large, where foundations weren't put in quite right, and now the structure's leaning. Or I've heard this happen several times. So the accessibility is always in question, but for the most part, people get the general idea that you start strong and you finish strong. You start with a good foundation, you build the core components, then everything works together to create basically a machine that people can live in. And so that's what it is to be raised in it. You kind of go in. Lace up your bootstraps and get started. Maybe if you're working for if you're a developer's son like I was, you're basically out there. First thing you're doing is probably removing silt fences, or um, helping with waterproofing basements, or uh, maybe helping grade some behind some bulldozer that's pulling grade. Um, but over time you get to understand the whole process from foundation to roof, and eventually, like the things that you're questionable about, you get a general idea of how they work anyway, just from contextual, like, oh yeah, well, I know this piece is this way and that piece is that way, so I can understand the context here. Yeah, so it's it's a great thing.
That's awesome. So I did not grow up, having so many different like projects that were not just like frivolous, right? It wasn't like he was just doing that just to keep you busy and not get into trouble, or well, I mean maybe, but there was there was a purpose behind it, whether it was for another client, whether it was for your own house. I'm sure there was never a lack of work to be had. And also, they probably understood that there was this learning component of like later down the line, like you need to know all of these different components, right? You need to know each of
Yeah.
the little puzzle pieces, and you need to kind of wrestle with how one fits with the other, and you need to make mistakes. But then over time, you start building it until you are able to
Yeah.
appreciate the larger picture that it is. And but that process takes time. And so I know for me, like I didn't grow up having nearly that kind of like hands-on experience, but I did have an opportunity to go and live in Canada after graduating from university. And this was really like my first time opportunity. Oh, yeah. So this was like my first time, having experience in construction when I left left university. This was like in 2015. And I decided to go to Canada with a good friend of mine who's Canadian. And basically his father was a contractor and just made us do all of these different odd jobs. And I had no experience with like how to hold a chainsaw, no experience of what landscaping really entails, and just in terms of like usable strength, like like how demanding like 9 hours of shoveling gravel really means. Like it's very eye opening. And but it was also just like very like yeah, there's a certain simplicity to like the work and like the focus, but also just like how gratifying it is at the end of the day to say, wow, I can see that's the progress that I've made. Would you say that
Yeah.
that's maybe one of many perks to working in that kind of trade?
Well, I actually wouldn't say it is one of many. I'd say it is the central perk.
Mhm.
I think we're increasingly in a world that's very abstracted from meaning,
Mm,
and it's hard to understand the concept or the value of what you do, uh, just in general. Because there's so many intermediary steps that uh, oftentimes people find themselves kind of at a loss for words for what what actually is the end product. But I think when you're doing anything involved in real estate and the trades, you generally understand the value of what you've accomplished, and you have a relatively good idea of what the market value, what the actual payment for that should be.
mm,
Um, Now, that being said, there's a lot of like investment capital that flows in, a lot of differentials with how global economics move. Sometimes even you could have a project that just because of because of the current trade differential and like forex or whatever, that project might be worth less than you would think it would be because of the country it happens to be in or whatever. But in general, when you go out and you work, you see the value of it.
I think there's something really amazing when you can just kind of point at like a building or a house and say, I built that. It's very clear kind of what the value is. And then also with like the market value that you were explaining, all of that is, much more straightforward than someone maybe like on Wall Street trying to explain what they do and why it matters. And I think that's the kind of like level of abstraction that you were talking about that kind of in this modern world of ours, it's just kind of, yeah, we're starting to see this kind of split. And there's a real sense of like, like the novelty of, oh, wow, you know how to like fix a toilet or you know how to build a shed or, anything that involves like a trade. It's kind of seemingly, become, I don't know, so distanced from what we normally see in like work. So I just kind of wanted to point out like, wow, like what a perspective that you bring because that's literally been your training. And I'm curious, like as you were going through this process of like learning about various different skills and different situations that you were being asked to do. Um, is there any like moment that you experienced that was like, I don't know, that stands out as like a particularly like hard lesson that you had to learn? And why, and again, like what has that kind of like led you in terms of like new insights as an adult? Um, Yeah.
Well, I think for me, the biggest hard lesson I had to learn was that life it isn't given. Like I mean, it's a gift, obviously, but um, it comes with people having to put hard work into establishing a framework. My ancestors had worked really hard to build what I grew up in and took for granted. The coronavirus pandemic really affected a lot of the people that I knew and loved and cared about. I lost two uncles, and I lost one of my best friends. Um, and that 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 process, really going through it, grieving it, coming to terms with it, and realizing that, yeah, it's up to me to define. Like, I have to continue to work on meaning. I have to continue working on purpose. I have to continue working on value. I have to, I have to dig deep into my soul and continue to build on what was given to me. And those lessons are no longer just like taken for granted. It's something that I actually uh, I have to put into application and practice. And that's probably the biggest hard lesson in it, right? You know, just knowing that life is fragile, and we all have to apply ourselves to making it more stable, more safe. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Having a deeper sense of appreciation for those who came before us, right? Laying that foundation, right, as you spoke about in terms of like even a building, it's so important, right? Everything kind of rests upon that. And then I've heard that before about life being fragile, and we can see that, right, with not only like those kind of, we know, like loved ones passing, but also actually I can share right now in a moment of vulnerability that a former student of mine, I found out not too long ago, passed away, right?
Sorry
21
to
year
hear.
old. I'm like,
Wow.
yeah. And it was just like shocking, right? Because suddenly they were here, right? And now they're not. And what kind of explanation, right, in terms of, oh, it was this or it was that, will satisfy that sense of like, well, it's not going to bring that person back. And it's
Hmm.
troubling. I think it's that kind of, um, you know, the dilemma, right, of humanity, of like grappling with their own mortality, and then the
Hmm.
purpose of like what all this means. But at the same time, I think that there's duality within the whole life is fragile, kind of thing, because there is great resilience that comes from those stories of individuals. I would probably count your grandfather as one of them, who persevered, right, who demonstrated through his actions, right, that this is how you extract as much value from your life as possible, and then what it means to put it back into your community. And so
Hmm.
there are these multiple things kind of happening, coexisting. And I think they show us tremendous lessons, right? Of kind of, questions to ponder, and then hopefully, hope to kind of, persevere. And,
Hmm.
the world that, like, let's say your grandfather grew up in is unquestionably different from what's happening now, in terms of what we're grappling with. And, and so I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts about, with this background of yours, right? Of these skills, but more importantly, these values. How are you now, kind of applying that, and looking ahead towards the future? I know you mentioned about cybersecurity. Seemingly, it doesn't feel like, oh, okay, worked in a construction company, and then the logical evolution is cybersecurity. Could you maybe explain what is cybersecurity, and then also how did you connect the dots?
Well, the biggest thing to know about cybersecurity is it's all aspects of securing boundaries that have to do with the digital age, really. So it could be something as simple as managing access to a data center, like who can actually go on the floor and who can't. It could also be people being aware of like what needs to be done for um, being aware of what needs to be done for protocol as far as how you answer emails, how you respond to people, who has access to files, when those files should be accessed and how they're accessed. One of the biggest examples is two-factor authentication. That's one that most people run into daily. When you try to access an account and all of a sudden you're texted a security key that you have to enter in, or you might have to use an app called like Authy, or get an authentication code. So you have your basic password, and then you have that other password that goes into it. Another example that a lot of people don't understand is like when you're, say, when I went to China, I had gone through Japan, and I had been using my credit card in Japan, and it was fine. And then when I got to Beijing, I tried to set up my credit card, and it didn't work. And then about a moment later, it started working. Well, the reason why that happened is because it bumped off of somebody's uh, auto, the person who was most likely managing it. It- Basically they had an automatic script that denied the transaction initially, but they then had a human being look at it, and they were able to contextually understand that you had to um, that I had just been in Japan, so it was logical that I had gone to China because I just made a purchase at the airport in Japan. So that's an example of like somebody being able to look at it and say contextually, oh yeah, this is definitely, he's in China. He needs access to his funds. So they were able to get that through to me. Um, what made me get interested in it was just the general idea that you really can't have um, you really can't get too far ahead of yourself one way or the other with it, because it's pretty straightforward. Um, if you're able to secure an organization, if you're able to secure files, that's proof of work. That's proof of concept. It works really well with traditional trades, traditional ways of being. Um, Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing uh, that led me into it is it's a good cross sectional experience between blue collar and white collar work. That you're able to do both. So it's very pragmatic, but it's also very accessible. I mean, it's also very scalable too. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing more about that. And it's true, right? We are living in the digital age, and I think more and more concerns over you know like privacy concerns really about like data usage is going to be more and more prevalent, and yeah, more important than ever. So it sounds also like, while it's like pragmatic of you to kind of like go down that line, there's also, I think, certain kind of like vision of like, oh, what is this infrastructure going to look like down the line? What are things about security that we can maybe anticipate that are going to crop up? Because, as you know, right, like before the internet came around, probably people had no idea of like what what a deep fake could potentially really mean, right?
yeah,
And that, yeah, it was just like that's something out of sci-fi, right? Like who
yeah,
would have thought? You can't anticipate that until suddenly now it's here. And I'm sure that's a question that probably you grapple with, since I know you are working on like completing a kind of like continuing education
hmm,
program, right, in cybersecurity through Harvard,
yeah,
and you're
yeah.
gonna I hope I'm not, revealing anything secret,
No,
but
no, no, it's
ambitiously looking ahead to building out your own kind of company in that area. But
yeah.
yeah, like, what do you have to say about those kind of like unanticipated, issues that we all know will come up and about? But like, yeah, where do you see yourself in terms of like your role in building a business, and how does one anticipate that?
Well, there's several possibilities, right? The first is you could develop a new technology. The second is you could be providing some sort of service solution. Um, my route in is mostly around sales. Understanding the core components, getting some certifications down, and then working off of just more of from a sales role. Um, I would like to eventually be either selling a product or solution in the space, and so that's where I'm at. That's what I'm doing. Um, as far as anticipating existing threats or new ones to be formed, um, I'm kind of dealing with this existential question of like, can AI, how far can AI be used to spot AI? You know, like how far can AI be used to understand that AI is being used? I know, for instance, like, say, from the defense industry, they talk about this concept of missile interception. That once a projectile gets moving at a certain speed, it becomes exponentially harder to stop it than it is to launch it. So it follows a linear curve at a point, but then at a point it becomes like way harder. It's like trying to catch a baseball thrown from a pitcher who can throw it like 100 miles an hour. It's a bit harder to catch it than it is to throw it, so to speak. But I'm wondering, that's the big question that's on my mind is if AI continues to be used uh, to create threats, how far can it be used to intercept threats, and how well can it be? And at what point are we going to have to be like, okay, nobody gets to use this type of technology anymore because it's just too damaging, too scary. Because it would get to that point, if it gets to a certain point, then you're not going to be able to. People are not going to have the freedom to do it. You know what I mean? Because it would be
Yeah,
too
and
damaging.
yeah, that makes me think about another example that's also kind of very much on a similar scale in terms of like magnitude and just imminent danger. I think about nuclear weapons, right? That's
Yep.
where like a certain technology, right? The cat gets out of the bag, and then it's just been this process of like trying to kind of I don't know, like create these guardrails, right? But then the question is, are guardrails enough, right? What does actual abolition of that technology look like? But then it's
Uh-huh.
more so the deeper roots of people who would want to use that technology, right? For what purposes? And I think that becomes much more a case of like humanity's maybe insatiable need to like further technology, or maybe like the greed component of like like why they like how that would be used in terms of furthering themselves, the power differential. I don't know. But I find that those two examples of AI and nuclear weapons to be quite similar, but nuclear
Yes.
weapons are a little bit further ahead. Do you think there's anything we can learn from the efforts to kind of roll back a technology like nuclear weapons that can then be applied to AI?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the biggest examples, right, is that the actual launching of a warhead is a very quick process, and especially once they get up to speed. But the process of creating that the process of creating the weapon or refining all of the elements that are part of it, that takes a time. That takes a long time, and there's a lot of intelligence gathering that obviously done to see who's up to what. By the different governments in the world, and I think the same with AI. If you can see that somebody's kind of working on a process, you kind of get the idea. Okay, well maybe once this process is done, maybe it's going to be too hard to catch it. So, I mean, I think they'll probably, I pray against it, but there'll probably be a seminal moment where the whole world realizes, like, this is insane. We've got to be careful. Um, I think obviously in American history there was a moment where people realized, okay, this is no good, and then there was another moment later on uh, throughout the process of the nuclear industry as well as nuclear weapons, however they've been used. Um, it's these moments that happen that make people realize, oh wait, peace and freedom have a cost, and we have to be on guard and vigilant in order to maintain it. It requires a lot of ancestral wisdom, really. People need to understand that, like, none of us live in a vacuum. We're all part of something bigger, something more holistic, more codependent, and we have a lot to be thankful for. But we have to be well. I guess I was thinking about this question earlier. It's the balance between gratitude and vigilance, like knowing what you had. Oh, it's between gratitude and humility. Knowing what you have, being thankful for it, but also knowing that you have to be humble because you could lose it, and it's super important. And that obviously then leads to vigilance, right? Kind of a recommitment to
Yeah.
value what you have.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important. I appreciate that, like, from this very large conversation about the future of AI, how we've grappled as a nation and not just as the world, in general, with like nuclear weapons. It ties into these core beliefs, right? About kind of like what are we setting ourselves up for? What do we value as a nation? And then on the local level, how can gratitude, humility, right, understanding things within their proper context lead to decisive action that will hopefully seek to not only dismantle like oppressive structures that no longer serve us, but kind of bring in like a new, I don't know, it's like a groundswell of like creativity, right? That is geared towards, the kind of opposite of that. Because I feel like, nuclear weapons is an expression of evil and should not be used. And we
Mm-hmm.
have an example of that with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I fear
Mm-hmm.
that AI in its trajectory is potentially towards that same kind of evil, right? And it
Yeah.
could impact us in ways that we can't possibly understand right now, but we are setting ourselves up. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think that what you're speaking about really ties into this notion of global citizenship. And I wonder, is this
Mm-hmm.
something like as a concept you've thought about? And maybe can you expound a little bit more on? I feel like this, what you've talked about, gratitude, humility, vigilance, definitely plays into it. But maybe could you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is maintaining core relationships. Um, one where AI, well, first off, where nuclear affected us, right, was at a much more macroscopic level. But I think AI is going to affect us at a much more microscopic level, like um, our core thoughts, how we integrate with each other, how we communicate with each other. Um, that I think there already is a loneliness epidemic. I think people are going to at some point really almost see friendship as as an inconvenience, you know, and um, I think that that's going to be really really damaging. There might be a whole lost generation for it, you know, and I think the humility of it is to understand that, hey, if you've got somebody in your life that wants to talk to you, um, that is a present human, is not a machine, that's something to be thankful for, because that's another person who has limited time to experience life, and they're willing to share that with you. I think that's what I mean. Like, I think humility at this point is going to be more on that basis. Um, Understanding what the honor is to have another human be willing to kind of put aside hedonism and all the trappings of a fake artificial world and have some core real experience with you. Um, so
Mm,
I think maintaining right now, I think the vigilance is really feeding into your core relationships, the people that are influential in your life, knowing that they need to be respected, or at the very least that those connections need to be respected, or at the very least the the archetype of it needs to be respected. Because even if yeah, we all get annoyed at times at the people we love or the people that love us, and boundaries are good, but it's important to understand the value of that, of what it is to have another human care. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're speaking about this, right? How there is this loneliness epidemic, and there are so many disruptors of our attention and our desire to want to make connections that are kind of like alienating us from a really mm, core desire, I think, amongst humans, right? Given that we are social animals and that we are kind of wired to link up with other people. And so
Hmm.
we're kind of given this like false narrative about the digital age that now making connections is easier than ever, when in
Yeah.
reality, it's far from the truth. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you kind of highlighting like the importance of these kind of connections that we need to establish and maintain. And so like my question to you then, right? So we think this digital age, like, going on social media is like that's how we connect with each other. But I think both
Hmm.
of us can probably get behind this saying that's a little superficial. So what does
Yeah.
genuine connection really look like? Or how does one take action to build genuine connection in this kind of like, universe that we are inhabiting, that is kind of looking for like the easier way out or the more superficial kind of lens. So yeah, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think the main thing that we have to do is be authentic. Yeah, like if you don't have the right words to speak, that's fine. Like if you don't know what you're supposed to do, that's fine. You know, we just have to be able to really able to just explore what it is to have the in between spaces, to be able to uh, spend time with people even if you don't know the right words to say. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to make sure that we have the ability to be present even if we don't have the right words to say, even if we're not sure of what we're supposed to do, even if we're not even if we don't have all the right answers. um, it's okay. It's okay just to be a friend experiencing life with another friend. It's okay to be there, and to be present, even if you say the wrong thing. Um, I've had processes where people have come to me grieving, and I haven't known what to say, and in the end, I feel like I said the wrong thing. But even that, I tried, you know, and that's part of being human. It's part of being who we are. And there's beauty in that. There's beauty in messing up, in not knowing, you know. Um, it's good. I think that the real value in AI is to typecast things before you spend time with people to know, because it's good to be able to practice, right? But um, and it's also good that we work on our presentation, that we work on our focus, that we work on who we are. But at the end of the day, being human is about just being real, you know. And real is messy sometimes. It's not always perfect, you know. It can be a lot of things.
I totally, yeah, that resonates. And I think, but it's so hard though, because I mean, we live in a world with like these high expectations, seemingly unrealistic. Perfectionism comes into play, heightened feelings of anxiety about how others will perceive us. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like it's a safe playground to practice. And yet here you are saying you got to be real, you got to be authentic, and if you make mistakes, hey, that's beautiful. But like, is it just maintaining that kind of mindset, or like yeah, I mean, what's going on with like this kind of conflict that I'm describing? Because I feel like a lot of people would probably feel that way.
I think it's a balance. I think that's real. The benefit of AI is being able to practice or being able to typecast things. But at the end of the day, everything fails under scrutiny. You know, when we get close enough to anything, we realize the flaws of it. It's just at what level are you studying it? But this process of refinement of getting better, it's a balance. I mean, not every car that rolls off a production line is of the exact same quality, you know, but they're all of an acceptable quality. They're supposed to be. And I think that that's the same thing with our expectations out of work. Not every day is going to be as productive as the next day. I mean, there were times when growing up where some days you felt like you shouldn't even have gotten out of bed. You were behind. But the overall pro- process of going through it a whole year, you'd look at the year and focus, and it would be like, yeah, that year was actually worth it. And I think that that's the big thing is just knowing how to balance that. And that's what it is really balance. It's balance, knowing how far to try and how far to relax. And that's actually sourced, believe it or not, that's sourced through community. You know, when you get around people, they help inform to what level do you actually want to excel or succeed. To what level are you okay being complacent?
You know, I love
Yeah.
that it's this circled back very naturally to community. And I think that this is a great opportunity for us to kind of, just sit on that and appreciate community and whichever community you are connected to or whichever community, right, you really show up for. And then having that gratitude for the community, I think is a great starting place. I really appreciated, this has been like a really stimulating conversation that's taken us from, kind of like childhood tinkering and being put to task on various projects to then building out larger, like building houses, right? I'm sure you've built e- everything imaginable, with your company, like, your grandfather company. And then we
Hmm.
started like looking into like cybersecurity. And then we talked about nuclear weapons. And it's just been a really incredible kind of like ping pong, like all over the place.
Hmm.
And then it comes back to community, right? So it's just been a really lovely conversation, and I always love hearing out what further recommendations my guests have in terms of book recommendations or movie recommendations. Is there anything that kind of comes to mind that you'd like to suggest for the listeners out there?
Well, I think the first thing, my favorite author is J.R.R. Tolkien. I mean, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is just incredible, mainly for the fact that he's referring to the archetypes of personality. I mean, that's how I read it. Middle Earth is actually the real Earth. It's just in a different form. Um, yeah, I mean, I think knowing the struggle of carrying the ring, so to speak, but also not being overtaken by it. I mean, there's a lot of parallels for that for AI, for instance, or nuclear technologies, or any technological development. There's always a temptation of things being used for evil or good, and I think he does such an amazing job throughout the Silmarillion, throughout all the trilogy, and through the Hobbit of really exploring those differences and what they are. And really, it's not pure allegory. You know, he's actually really dealing with the, the, the confusion of the metaphysics, like how characters are carrying their own personal struggles that are a product of their lived experience, and like what does that actually mean? Um, yeah, as far as I really like this show Battlestar Galactica. Have you seen it? The 2007 series. I mean, there's a lot of filler in it at times, but it it really hits a lot of these core concepts home. There's some big questions about uh, how humanity relates to like our creations. Um, how far do we go before the thing that we're that we were supposed creating for us is ended up kind of like taking over our meaning, our purpose, and how far to how far to go into that. Yeah, so those all go hand in hand, I think. So those are my two recommendations for people.
No, those are great recommendations. You're the first to recommend Lord of the Rings on the podcast, and I'm so happy. I mean, I have not read the whole trilogy, if I'm being completely honest, but I have watched the movies too many times, and they're beautiful, and I love all, like, for all the reasons that you said. And then Battlestar Galactica. I knew this was going to come up at some point. We've had longer conversations back in China about this, and yeah, and it's not the happiest of notes, in terms of kind of like being overtaken and like grappling with your creation and kind of its unintended, how it plays out in unintended ways, but
Yeah.
still very thought provoking and very relevant for the conversation that we had today. And so it's just, I feel like, from humble roots to global implications and deeper sense of mission about how we'll contribute to some of these kind of, let's call it as it is, right? Evil forces. We
Hmm.
we need to do something about it, and I'm happy to hear that you're being very thoughtful and building out this new foundation for your cybersecurity company, and
Hmm.
I'm wishing you all the best, Byron. And
Yes.
so,
Thank you.
the last minute or so, I'd love to give you the last word. Any final like send offs or like final thoughts as we wrap up this conversation?
I think the two things is you matter and the best is yet to come. I think that's the biggest thing for everybody to realize that they matter and that the best is yet to come. So that's my send off. It's pretty simple, but I think it's often forgotten. The world has a way of making us feel small and unimportant, but we all matter and we all have a bright future. Yeah.